Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. Joining us is John Grant and Jenny Hollingsworth from Innovia Consulting. And John and Jenny will be presenting on your production orders created and processed just like that. It's one of their continued webinar series for Business Central for Manufacturing 101. And before I pass it over to John and Jenny to cover on this topic, I would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review and share with anyone. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions box and we'll get them answered as we go along during the webinar. All right, so now I'm going to pass it on over to Jenny to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie. All right, so as Angie stated, we're going to talk about your production orders today, created and processed just like that. And I'll just give you a quick introduction to John and myself. My name is Jenny Hollingsworth. I am a senior application consultant here at Innovia Consulting. Been working here for almost 15 years, and prior to that, I was at another NAV partner for about 10 years. So all in all, been working with NAV and Business Central for 25-ish years. So that's a little bit of background on myself, and then I'll let John introduce himself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm also a SAC, Senior Application Consultant. It's an acronym, but
boy.
have been at Innovia for like 10 plus. Have had a chance to work on other ERP products as well as NAV/BC. Worked on AX, Sightline, Made to Manage, a little bit SAP. So it helps when we talk about different areas that companies require, and just this session is really, we really appreciate if you have a thought or a question, bring it up, and we'll answer it during the session, because I'd like to make this valuable to you guys, that you come away with something. I know that we're going to cover the production orders and any questions for again.
Thanks. So today's agenda, we're gonna, like John said, we're gonna talk about everything and anything related to production orders and the creation of them. So we're gonna look at the setups, some of the basic functionality, some extra features you might like, how the journals work to post transactions, and maybe a few reports that might help you. All right, so let's first go through the basics of production orders. So the first thing that John will talk about is, what are the 5 types of production orders out there and how would you use them?
Yeah, we'll do a quick, there's 5 production orders types: simulated, planned, firm planned, released, and finished. And most companies work with firm planned, released, and finished. I'll do a high level of what that is. A firm planned order is created, can be from a planning worksheet, can be created from the sales order. We'll go through a little bit of that, but it allows us to take that, to schedule it based on the due date, typically, and then it allows us to see those components need date, which allows us to run the requisition or planning worksheet to see, help us with when we need to order product if we're going to be short. So, and then firm plan, typically I'm a planner. I am working with firm planned orders, and I'm scheduling, let's say today is Wednesday and I'm working on Friday's or Monday's schedule. I look at everything that we might need that are firm planned within the due dates, check if we have inventory, maybe change things around, but basically then change them to released, meaning I can record time and labor components against them on the floor. It's ready to work on. So firm planned and released work side by side in your process. Both are available for planning. Finished, of course, is when you change status on a production order to finished. It removes it from the release list and archives it, so you can always go back and look at it, look at statistics. How do we do? How is our plan versus actual? We thought we were going to run it this way, and maybe we ran it this way. So we have swings in the expected costs versus actual costs. And then simulated production orders can come into play if you, more so if you're building your production order and you've got questions on it. I don't want that planning components to go out to purchase yet. I'm still working on it. Maybe I'm finalizing some options or configurations. So Simulate allows you to work with that production order, pull in the bill, pull in the route, do a refresh, just like you do on a firm plan, but none of that data is available for purchasing yet. That's probably the biggest reason to use Simulated if you are in process. And planned, not so much. Planned is kind of if we get these orders, what kind of load is it going to put on our work centers? What I see customer use are mostly firm plan released and simulated in some companies.
All right. So there are 3 different ways you can create a production order in Nav or Business Central. What we're going to go through, just to put it out there right away, would be the same process whether you're on a version of Nav or you're on Business Central. So either product, production is going to work the same way. So there's 3 ways to create a production order. Manually, so enter a manual production order, create it yourself. From a sales order, you can automatically generate production orders from sales orders and tie those 2 together. We'll be showing that later on. And then, of course, the planning worksheet. So production orders will then be created based on your planning parameters and demand from sales orders. So we're going to go through manually and from a sales order today. Planning worksheet, there's a lot of information there. So that is its own webinar coming up in a future webinar in our series. We'll let you know that date at the end of this session. So let's first look at the fields on a production order. So John's going to just describe on the header and the lines what fields you need to worry about when you create a production order. And then we'll discuss a few functions, and then we'll go over to Business Central and we'll do a demo of that before moving on. So John, the production order header.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so from a high level, the number series typically assigned automatically. And then the key field is most customers will run source type as item and what are you making? And then you put the quantity you're making and the due date. From a high level, you've filled in those fields, and that's really all you would need to fill in to create the production order header.
And we'll go through, you'll see a source type, as John mentioned, of family and sales header. We're going to go through those 2 options in a few slides. So we'll discuss how those work.
Okay, so the second part of any of the production, which is really the work order that goes on the floor, is typically filled in. When you fill in that header part, there's a process called refresh where it builds this line we're looking at here. So it knows what item it's making, it's got a due date, the default is backward scheduling, so it's looking at your routing and determining how long. So your start date is calculated based on, let's just go with backward scheduling. So on this one, we've got a due date of 11/5 and a backward schedule, and it calculates the start date and the end date. And why would the end date and time be different than the due date is because in most setups, you do want a 1-day buffer between the time that production has to have it finished and the due date that a sales order might need. So often you'll see where the ending date is 1 day before the due date. And then the quantity is built from the header, as we saw, we filled in the quantity. The production BOM that it uses and the routing number are stored on the item record. That's where it gets that from. So when you say refresh or build this production order, it's going to go to the item record and pull in the bill and the route that's referenced on the item record. The versioning is, if you're using versions, that would come into play. It would check what's the current version to build my production order based on the due date. that we have of this. So that's the route Obama would grab based on the due date. So just keep in mind, this data here is really when you hit that magic button refresh, it's going to build this for us. You don't really have to enter this manually.
All right, so as John was saying, to initially populate the production order lines and also bring in the components and the routings for this production order, this refresh production order action needs to be done. So we have a screenshot here of the options when you refresh a production order. You would want to refresh a production order if you created a new production order or you changed or updated an existing production order. So maybe you changed your quantity you're producing, maybe you changed the due date, maybe you added a new, that you want to use a production BOM version or a routing version. So all those would be reasons that you would need to refresh or update that production order. So on your screen here, your first option here is the scheduling direction. So are you backward or forward scheduling? Okay. If you're backward scheduling, you do need to enter a due date on the production order. So we backward schedule from that due date. If you're forward scheduling, you'd have to enter a starting date on the production order. So we'd know the date to forward schedule from. In our examples, we'll be backward scheduling. Then you got the calculate section. This is crucial depending on what changes you made. If it's a brand new production order and you just want to calculate the production order line, add the components and the routing, then you would want to make sure that you calculate lines, routing, and components. You'd want to populate all of those. Now, if, for example, on the line, you change the routing, when you come here to refresh the production order, you only want to refresh the routing. You want to make sure you're not refreshing the production order line and setting it back to the default routing from the item card. So these are very important options when you are refreshing or updating production orders. And we'll show you an example of that. And then finally, if you're using advanced warehousing, we will have another session on advanced warehousing at a later date. But do you want to create an inbound request automatically? So you can set that. All right, so then you would click OK, and that would refresh or update your production order. So that's one of the functions you'd want to run. Another function on production orders is, of course, change status. So on the ribbon of the production order, my pointer here, you have a change status option, and that will bring up the change status page. So you can change a planned production order into a firm plan into a release, and then a release into a finished. So it's really dependent upon which type of production order you're currently sitting on. In this example, I'm changing a firm plan to a release production order because it's ready for the shop floor, it's ready for processing. One thing to note here, there's a posting date option. So if you are automatically consuming components or labor on change of a production order status, it will use this posting date to post those entries to your item ledger and capacity ledger. I'm not going to say a lot more on that. We are going to have a whole another webinar on how auto posting of consumption labor works, so be sure to attend that one. But that is what the posting date here is for. And then finally, it also is used when you're finishing a production order as well. So what is the finish date? And then I'm going to let John explain the update unit cost field.
Yeah, that's always an interesting one, and we've had discussions with Microsoft about this. At the bottom line, it's intended to use if you, let's say you have a product you're running day after day after day, but for this one particular production run, you're substituting, you're testing some new material. So you've got a custom bill of material. You're I don't know, you're trying to figure out if a change might be good going forward. And typically those kind of things you might pay a little more because you're not buying volume on the component, etc. And it does allow you to check that when you finish the production order to update the unit cost right away, which goes to cost of sales. But in the end, working with Microsoft, this field is not necessary to mess around with. They felt it was predicated with item adjust cost working in the background and this and that. It's just not something that you have to worry about. And a couple other comments just in general. On these statuses, you can't go backwards. If you're new to Nav, you can't say, oh, I finished it. Wait a minute, I forgot to post something. I can't go back and change it to release, because once a production order is finished, you cannot add more labor or material or make adjustments to output, those kind of things. So that's why it's important in your process when production is done with it, they kind of review the statistics, they look at, yeah, it looks good, goes to someone who will finish, financially finish, I'll call it, changing the status to finished. And if there's any corrections to make, you can do them, but if you change it to finished, you can't go backwards. Now that's out of the box, and that's really what we recommend. We have, it was a gold and silver company that worked with those products, and they had a surcharge on a sales invoice, so it had to be very precise. We have messed around with that, but don't recommend it. And again, working with FirmPlan as a planner, I'm scheduling work for Monday. I've got these 10 orders. There's a method to release all 10 at once, and you create your shop paper and packet and all that stuff. So it's FirmPlan to release, and in the planning world, it sees both of those types of orders and it runs with it. So, but just a little more info on going backwards is something that some customers don't realize when they first start working with Nav. They finish it, they race to finish it, and then production might say, hey, we reported, instead of 10, we reported 100 or 20, and we got to reverse 10. Well, once it's finished, you have to do it other ways. You can't do it on the production.
All right. So the last function or feature on a production order would be the Replan feature. And I'm going to let John talk about that.
Yeah, a Replan is a feature that if you're not running the planning worksheet totally, this allows you to create the production order and then go to the Replan function and create additional production orders that are sub-assemblies on the main production item, and it will be time phase due at the start of the top level production order. So if you think about it, I've got, and I know the bicycle is kind of boring, but I've got a manual production order for 10 bicycles. If I hit the Replan and I don't have any wheel assembly sub-assemblies or chain sub-assemblies, it will create 2 additional production orders, and they're tied to that first order. And that's what that Replan, if you expose that field, there's a Replan reference number. And I know that if I, as a planner, have to do something with that top level item, like in the FirmPlan, we were going to run it, but the customer moved it out, or this is a replenishment order. I know that I've got 3 production orders to move, not just 1, because the bottom 2 are tied. At least I can see that they're linked to the top level. So then I would move all 3 to, maybe I move it out a week or move it in a week. That's one technique you can use if your process applies there, where it's kind of, I've got the top level item and I generate 2 sub-assemblies, and that's really kind of compact production. I don't have my sub-assemblies accumulating other bicycle wheel assemblies. They're unique to this one, but if I did, then I probably wouldn't use this technique, because I want the sub-assembly to represent, oh, we're making bike 1000 and bike 101. I need 10 of sub-assemblies of the wheel for the top one and 2 for the bottom. I want 1 production order for 12. I don't want to have 2 different production orders. So that's just in how you look at how you run your business and what works for you. But be aware the Replan can work nicely in some production facilities.
And in our example on the screen, we're working with candy. So our first line there, production order 59, is for M&M's mix. So we want we want packages of chocolate, and we want packages of peanut, which those are finished products in themselves with components and labor. So when we did the replan, it created 60 and 61 to fulfill 59. And you can see here, you have to add this to your screen, but on the production order list screen, there is a replan reference number, and you can add that field to see which production orders are tied together. All right, so let's move to Business Central before we discuss some of the extra features. And let's take a look at how to create a firm plan production order. We're going to look at refreshing it, running replan, and then changing the status. So let me move over to Business Central. All right. John, can you see Business Central?
Yep.
Just want to make sure. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to create a firm plan production order. So I'm going to go to my firm planned list, create new. And we're going to do an item. We're going to do the M&M mix. So I'm going to select that item number, populates my description for me, and we're going to do a quantity of 20. And our due date is going to be May 30th. We backwards schedule, so that's why I'm entering a due date. If you were forward scheduling, you'd want to go to the scheduling tab and put in a starting date. All right, so as John said earlier, when we showed this in the slideshow, the line is not created. So in order to create the line and populate that, we would want to refresh production order. And at this point in time, like I said, I want to backward schedule. I want to populate the lines, which will also then populate the routings and my component need. So I want to do all three. I'm going to click OK. All right, it went ahead and populated my finished good line. And if I go to that line, you know, I can now see under line components.
You got to scroll up on that. There it is.
It's showing all of the components that I need for this line. So it brought in my production BOM that was associated with that finished good item. Same with the line routing. So it brought in my routing lines for this item. I only have one routing line because I'm packaging. This one's combining two different other production BOMs. All right, I'm just going to reopen my production order here so the line displays. There it is. Okay, so now you saw that we had the items, the components, and then also the routing. And my Alexa's starting to talk, sorry about that. Okay, so at this point, we were talking about making changes to this line. What if we were going to change the routing? We decided for this one, we didn't want this specific routing. We wanted my FG1000 routing. So I'm going to change that routing. Okay, I need to refresh the routing lines on this production order for this routing. So I'm going to go to refresh production order. I do not want to recalculate the line down here because then it would bring back my default BOM and route from the item, and I had changed it. So we're not going to calculate the lines, but we're going to go ahead and recalc the routing. So I turned off lines and component need and click OK. So now if I go look at the line routing, you can see I have a lot more route steps here for instead of that one packaging routing. So it did go up and update that routing. All right. So because of this, this is a mix of M&M and peanut. I want to create the production orders, if required, for the M&M plain and the M&M peanut. If I had them in stock already and I did a replan, it wouldn't create the production orders because there's already stock available to use for this one. But if there's not stock available and I go to plan and replan, I'm going to want to plan all my levels and click OK. It's going to go ahead and update my production order and create my other production orders. So here you can see 62 is the one I manually created. And now you see they created 63 for the chocolate and 64 for the peanut, all tied to production order 62. And one thing John mentioned earlier on screen, but my production order 62, the due date was May 30th. All right, but we have a safety lead time set up on manufacturing setup for 1 day. So the ending date is 5/29. So we want it completed by 5/29. Notice on the chocolate and the peanut, the due date is 5/29. So we need these by 5/29 to fulfill the start date of the mix on 5/29. Now, if we drilled into these, there's actually times associated too. But again, because of my 1 day safety lead time, my due date of 5/29, I want them finished by 5/28, so I know they're going to be ready for 5/29. Okay, so again, that is a setup located on, and I can show you real quick, on the manufacturing setup page. It's on the planning tab right here, default safety lead time, set up to 1 day. Now, John, if I remember correctly, that can also be set up on an item by item basis too, if different items, okay.
Correct, you can if you had, for some reason, I know that I had one company where they had the sub-assembly had like a quality check for a day. They actually put 2 days on the item, which overrode this 1 day default. At another one where they cut wire for wire harnesses. So the production order was due, let's say, next Monday, but they wanted the sub-assembly, which was cut the wire, due a week before that one was to start. So they put 7 day safety lead time or 5 days, something like that, to push that backwards. So it had to be done like the Monday before the Monday the judge. All their work started on Monday. They looked at Monday as the schedule date for the whole week. So they launched orders a week at a time, and another use for that, which, just how do I spread out that work? How do I handle quality? How do I different things? A lot of different setup fields, and each company will, of interest is, I don't know if we have 2 companies that run the same, but a lot of capabilities to mess around with those dates, because that's critical. Because in the end, the components, the need date of the components is based on the production order. When do you need those components, either at an operation or at the beginning of the production order? So you have to sync all that up. Some companies want the purchase parts 2 days before the production order starts. All those kind of considerations come into play but to create the production order, create the bill, create the route, you want that logic to be built into when it's ready to go, because I'm going to turn around after I've created this production order, and I'm going to run planning tomorrow to understand if I'm short any material, need to buy anything. So it all kind of fits together.
And then while we're on here, just a quick note, with numbers for production orders, if you notice in our sample company here, our firm plan number series and our released number series are the exact same number. If you make the firm plan and the release the exact same number, from firm plan to release to finished, it'll carry through each of those stages as the exact same number and not change. A lot of people like that option, so just keep that in mind, that you can just set them up as the same number series and it will follow throughout. All right, so going back to the M&M mix, just a couple more things which John kind of led into on the production order. We're going to go through transactions posting to the production order, but again, this one is due 5/29 based on the safety lead time. But if you would go to line components, this one's a simple one. All the components are due at the start date of this 5/29. But like John said, you could have components attached to different operation steps, and then the due dates could be different depending on the date of the operation step.
Just I'll add one more thing. I think we're doing okay on time here. Oftentimes when you have a production order, if you want to change the quantity or the due date, you can do that right on this production order without refreshing. For instance, if we would change the quantity from 20 to 40 up on top,
we'd have to refresh. You'd have to change
okay.
the line.
If you change it back to 20, I'm in the wrong spot. Change that back to 20. Now change the 40 down below. Let's say that for some reason, if you do 40, it actually recalculates the start and end date, and it actually updates the components. So the bill of material now is based on that you need 40. So you do have some flexibility to, and where this comes into play sometimes is when you've started the production order maybe and you're changing the quantity. Same thing with the due date. If you change the due date up on top, I think it's going to change the item down below. Let's just try that once. I think it does. You move that out a week or something. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it updates down below for you. So, and this comes into play, which we didn't. We're going back to the. We built this with a default bill and route. But if you then went into that production order and you changed out a component, you added an operation, you don't want to wipe that out and start all over again. If you change the due date or the quantity, it'll do that for you. So I encourage you to do that in the test company, whoever the planner is, to understand what you can and cannot do with a production order once you've got it to this stage. There's more flexibility than you might think. So.
All right. Okay, so we successfully created a new firm plan production order. We refreshed it and we clicked replan to get our additional subcomponent production orders created. So I think we've gone through our creation of a production order. So I'm gonna flip back to the presentation. All right, so now we're gonna talk about a few of the extras that might be useful to you. The first one is, we talked about how to create a production order manually. We do have some customers that use this feature. You can automatically create production orders from sales orders. So here on the screen, you see I have a sales order up for Walmart. They're ordering 20 boxes due, you can tell this is an older order, December 1st of 2018. So if we go ahead and we click planning, create production order, it's going to come up and ask us what type of production order that we want to create, firm planned or released. Generally, John is a proponent for creating it as firm planned because the schedulers want to be able to say when to release it to the shop floor. They don't want the order processor saying to release it to the shop floor. So a lot of times people will do that as firm planned. And then it gives you two. Go ahead.
Just one note on that. What Jen just said is a lot of companies are at the point where they take an order and then they check with production, when can you get it done, in order to get back to the customer with the date they can promise it. And then you get, that process, you don't want the CSR creating the production order. You want the either planning to create it or the production. But once you get the understand what you might do, you have this great option. This is a good option for a lot of companies.
The two order types, you can do an item production order, which that would create one production order for each item line on the order. So if I had 5 different items on the order, it would create 5 production orders. Then you have project order, where one production order is created for all the items on the order. So you got one production order with 5 items on the same production order. I've never actually seen project order used in this instance. Everybody always creates an item order. I don't know, John, if you've seen.
Yeah, just see the project order, not so much, I guess, because you've got, but what the key there, what Jenny said was, production orders can have more than one item in that header line section. An example would be, we are working with a company that wood pellets. Okay, so they every day they want to produce, I don't know, so many bags of pellets. So we had a production order for the week that had each day listed as the due date. So we had 5 lines. We had the quantity that we planned. So planning had all the information. And when they posted output, they did it by day. So at the end of the week, they could see how did they do against their plan. So that was one way, one thought, one way to do it with out of the box functionality. So keep in mind, you can have more than one item on a production order. Another example would be the company makes and assembles this medical equipment, but part of that is making the frame for the box. And they were having trouble where that would be a separate production order, lost in the shuffle. They'd be ready to assemble the finished item, and the box wouldn't have been built yet. So what they switched to was putting that box on the same production order as the finished item. Again, it's going to be due 1 day before the need date of the start date of the finished item. So now I have a production order with both those items on, and then it's just your process on a production floor to make sure that flows together. But again, keep in mind, you can have multiple items on one production order if it fits your process. It's kind of hidden. A lot of people think it's a one-to-one, but it's not. So.
All right, so the second option, which I'll have John talk about as well, is a family production order. We have an example here. And then we'll move over to Business Central. We're gonna keep it moving because we still have a few different demos to show, especially with the journals. So we'll try to speed our pace up a little bit.
Okay, so family production orders typically are in the food. I've seen them in the food business where I have a mix that, in this case, we have bulk M&Ms, and we're packaging in different size packages. So on there's a function called family production order. You can define the family. You can enter the items and the quantities. The caveat is they all have the same routing, so it's a packaging step. And we had this at a food processor where they, I think they made salads, just huge batches of salad, but in the production order you would see 4 lines. We want 1 pound containers, 2 pound containers, 3 pound containers, how many, and then those are reported on one production order, pulling in the mix. So that's a family production order. Pretty much in the food industry is where I see that, or bottling of. I think we had a company that did hair grooming products, and they bottled in different size, but the solution was what they bottled. So you have that ability to set that up.
And then in those instances, the routing's the same. It's just the sizes that are different, right?
Yep. Yeah. That's yep. Okay. Just and then you got one production order to cover the whole bottling operation. For instance, you're just switching size bottles every so often. In that example.
Okay, so we're going to move over to Business Central. We're just going to show quickly how to create a production order from a sales order. Talk about that for a few minutes, and then we're going to move on to journals and how we can post labor and consumption. I'm going to open up Business Central, and I'm going to go to sales orders. And my first sales order here for Walmart, let's take a look at that one. So here we created a sales order for Walmart. They want 20 boxes of chocolate M&Ms, and they want it shipped to them on 6/1/2020. So we have to get this out to them, out the door by that date. Now, if I want to create a production order for this sales order, I'm going to go to Plan. I'm going to go to Planning. And I'm going to create production order. Gives me, I'm going to go ahead and do a firm plan like John suggested, and this one is an item order. I just need one production order for this one item. All right, so firm plan production order 65 was created. And from this window, I can actually go to order tracking and see, oh, here's the planning line. And if I click on show, it'll actually show me that production order. So notice the due date on the production order is 6/1. The due date is matches the shipment date from the sales order. So that's something you want to be aware of. So the due date created will be the shipment date from the sales order. And of course, because we have a safety lead time of 1 day, it means our ending date is 5/31, 1 day ahead of time. All right, so now this sales order and this production order are linked together. There's a hard reservation between the two of them. So the order can now be tracked and we can view the connection between sales, production, and inventory from here. All right, because there's a hard reservation between the two, if we wanted to change dates on the sales order or the production order, it's now going to give you warnings, okay? So let's say I want to change the shipment date to 6/20. All right, brings up a warning. This sales line is currently planned. Your changes will not cause replanning, so you have to manually update your purchase order. Your production order if necessary. Do you still want to record this change? I do. So one thing to note is if I say yes, I'm going to have to go back and update the due date on my production order manually to 6/20. All right, so that's an important thing to note when you're working with sales orders linked to production orders. All right, so
just one tip there is I've had production and sales, they turned on the change log. If sales didn't communicate to production that, hey, that date changed, they needed to know who to point the finger at. So there you go. You can use the change log to do that.
okay. All right, so now let's move on to the journals. Let's look at the different types of production journals available for posting labor, material, and output. So there's 3 types of journals. We have the consumption journal, where you can post material consumption to the production order. This will post entries to your GL account for raw material inventory and WIP. You have your output journal. That will post labor and output to your production order. Your labor will post to a direct cost applied account and WIP, and your output will post to finished goods inventory and WIP. I'm giving you those just so you have an idea of what's posted in those journals. I'm going to give a plug for a future session or webinar in our series here, but we'll do one on manufacturing costing. And then we have our production journal, and that really combines both the consumption and output journals into one. And that could be accessed directly from the released production order. And we'll talk about some reasons why you'd use each journal as well as we go through it. But let's go ahead and we're going to move right over to Business Central, go through how each of the 3 journals works and see if anyone has any questions on that. All right, let me close my sales order. Get back to my main screen. And I'm going to go to the consumption journal first. All right, so on the consumption journal, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate consumption. So I'm going to pull in a production order. I'm going to pull in production order 25, and I'm going to have it pull in my expected output. Let's just make the screen a bit bigger. So here it pulls in all of my component lines from that production order. So I can go ahead and this is my expected output for each raw material item. If I'm just posting expected, I can go ahead and post the journal. If I'm not, if I've had a few changes or differences, maybe it was 305 pounds for sugar, I can go ahead and change those quantities to be my actual quantities as well. If I've only used a few of the lines, but not all of the lines, I could go ahead and select different lines to delete. And then those will populate again in the consumption journal at a later time. John, any thoughts on consumption before I post?
Yeah. I mean, this is if you are not using, I'll call it lean techniques to auto consume. If I posted, 10 output, I want to auto consume these components. And I encourage you to look at that where you could auto consume and then just use this for the exceptions where you consume more than you thought, those kind of things, or less, and you needed to reverse some of it. And then when you do that in the auto consumption part of it, which I think we talk about that in a later session, I'm not sure. But
we have a whole session on that. Yep.
Okay, yeah, because the rounding precision is key there, so I'll leave it at that. But this is manually consuming components.
So I'm going to go ahead and post the consumption journal. All right, those were posted. And just so we can take a look and see what that did on the production order, I'm going to go ahead and just open that production order up. All right, if I go to the top and I'm going to go to actions, navigate, and I'm going to look at the item ledger entries now associated with this production order. All right, so here it shows what I've consumed, what location it came out of, what was the cost amount actual of what I've consumed. That cost amount actual is now sitting in WIP for this production order. All right, so those costs are accumulating. Now if I look at the output journal, go ahead and do output for this same production order. All right, so for here, I'm going to put type in the order number, and then I'm going to explode the routing. Of course, I've done the output on this one already. I'm going to choose 27 here. Try that again. Explode the routing.
I think you have to select the item number.
It should explode. There we go.
There you go. Yep.
Let's try production order 30. Sorry about that. So for 30, I'm going to go ahead and explode the routing. It'll bring in all of my route steps, all my operation steps. If I scroll over here, I can enter my actual setup time, my actual run time. Here you see the output quantity, and then also a scrap quantity. So maybe I only worked on one operation step. I would only have to enter the time for that one operation step and post the journal. Okay, so you can just post whatever you worked on so far. Maybe I'm entering everything at once. And then at each step, you can say what you output. So 5 was the total quantity I was supposed to output, but maybe you had a scrap quantity at one step. So now instead, we're outputting 4. Okay. All right, so the output will post on the final operation step. And then one thing to note in the journal is the finish status. If a routing step is finished, you would want to make sure you check mark that it is finished. And in a future webinar, we're going to go through machine load, work center and machine center load, and like what the capacity is versus, you know, what we actually did. If the capacity on this line was 6 hours and we didn't mark it finished, it would think we still have 2 hours of runtime on this operation, and we don't, we're done. So it would release that capacity. So the finished field is an important flag.
And just one thought on the screen, we get customers who ask, well, I want to do a start time and an end time and have it calculate how much runtime. That is not, you're not missing it. It's not available. So the runtime would have to be, somebody would have to be taking a time card, for instance, and figuring out somebody's time, and then enter it.
All right, so now when we post the journal, we're going to post labor entries to the capacity ledger and then output entry of the finished good. So if we go look at number 30, go to navigate, order entries, and look at that capacity ledger. The capacity ledger is what tracks all of the labor. So here you can see our quantity of labor, you can see our direct costs. If we had overhead costs in any of these work centers or machine centers, it would post the overhead costs as well. So now that's posted as a debit to WIP and a credit to direct labor, direct cost applied labor. And then if we look at the item ledger, now you'll see posted output. So here's my output line. We posted 4. In this instance, we're running in a standard cost system. So when we finish the production order, it's going to roll up all the costs and then put in the cost amount actual on that output entry. And again, we'll go through costing in a future demonstration. All right, so
just show statistics, Jenny, because that's just a quick look at what we did on this one. It totals it all up to know kind of where you're at. So that's a good screen if you're, you know, where we at, how much dollars do we have in it, that kind of thing.
all right, so I'm going to go to one other production order, and I'm just going to show you the production journal, and we can just talk about maybe when that would be used. We have about 6 minutes left here. All right, so on the production order, under the line button, you'll see production journal. And what that's going to do is that is going to pull in into one journal all of the consumption entries of raw, all of your output of the labor, the work centers, machine centers. It's gonna pull in your expected consumption and then allow you to enter your setup, your runtime, your output quantity, your scrap quantity, and of course that finished flag like we talked about in the output journal. So this really combines consumption and output into one journal. And I don't know, John, maybe if you could give a real quick example of why you might use this.
Yeah, if you're using time cards, you're probably going to use the output journal because the person running it may have, you know, 10 different production orders they worked on, or 5, and they're recapping. If they're turning in shop paper and they're writing on there for this production order the times and whatnot, then this journal would make sense, because you're dealing with that whole production order all at once. You don't have mixed data. So time cards make sense on an output journal. If you're reporting by production order, then this would be a good way to go, I think.
Once you fill in all of your information here, just like the other journals, you would just go ahead to posting and post, and then it would post all those consumption item ledger entries, output item ledger entries, and your capacity ledger to that production order. All right. Finally, are there any useful reports for production orders? So we have 2 of them here, and maybe John, if you could take
useful
a
is
minute and describe
the
it.
key word. I'll say that quickly. The what you put on the production floor, typically by customer, is unique to them, and what data do you want on the production paper or the traveler packet. If you have that goes with the, something you give to the lead person to delegate the work and whatnot. If you're not using online dispatch or anything, which is there's add-ons to do that, but out of the box you can print what they call a job card. Now this is the base one here, quick example of it. Most customers will massage this and do their things, but yes, and it might be barcoded, it might be less information or more. They might want to throw this, what your rate should be per hour, those kind of things. So in your shop packet, this is part of what I call shop packet, might also include your drawing, your setup notes, your QA documents. So that's just part of it. Might be labels you pre-print that go out with the production order. Each customer or each setup is a little unique, so just be aware that when you start using production work orders, what do you want on the floor? And I'm partial, clean, as key data. Some of the data you don't really need for the people to do the work on the floor, so that less chance for interpreting something incorrectly or whatever. So the production order, job packet, that's the base one. And the second report that might be of use is, I'm the planner. I'm looking at Friday, or let's say Friday's work or Monday's. I'm going to do a quick look at the shortage. This production order I filtered by due date. I've got 10 orders due next, that it could be scheduled for next Monday. And I might just want to look at a snapshot of the order for the shortage list. Can I launch this order to the floor without having problems where I don't have material? That's kind of and you do have this shortage list report available on every production order, has it on the ribbon. And it's okay. There are some unique things that to consider there. But again, do I want to release this production order or not? If I don't have the key material and I can't get it here to start next Monday, I might be looking at a scheduled receipt. Oh, it's supposed to come in Friday. Yeah, I'm going to launch this order for Monday, because this material should be here on Friday. So yeah, a planner would be using this. This is one of the reports they would use. So those 2, your shop packet and your shortage list, are good beginner, or just basic reports.
All right. Not any questions throughout, so I'll just give it a minute. Does anyone have any questions that they want to bring up at the moment?
You have to have one at least, right? Okay, I'll have to do a trivia one for you guys. Okay, so if I have a production order that I don't want to move, I want to lock it in, I don't want planning to tell me to move it, how do I do that? Anybody? We'll talk about that in a future session. How's that? So.
Oh, there's one here from Robin. What was the field to bring forward to tie production orders together? That was the Replan reference number.
Yep.
And I'll put that in the window. There you go. All right. If you don't have any more questions now, but you come up with any questions, I always like putting John up here. So John, our resident manufacturing expert, would love to answer your questions. So this is his information if you want to give him a shout. And then finally, here's some more of our manufacturing webinars coming up in our series. The next one is on April 30th, and that's how to auto post using flushing methods. So that is your automatic consumption of labor and material, either forward flushing or backward flushing. So that will, if anyone's interested in that, that's the next one that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah, that's really a nice lean, anybody on a lean journey, you're trying to cut down on transactions and whatnot, and that you should be using.
And then finally, at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Angie to finish us up.
All right, well, thank you, John and Jenny, for presenting. And to everyone on today's webinar, or if you're watching on demand, we thank you for joining us. And we do have a few more webinars coming up. This afternoon, we have Sana Commerce presenting on 5 reasons you need e-commerce built for Dynamics 365 Business Central and Nav. And next Tuesday, we have Lynn Haid from Innovia Consulting, and she's going to be presenting on the secret to simpler vendor payments in Business Central. So check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events. We're always adding new ones, so just be checking them out periodically. And Innovia has a podcast. If you haven't heard of it already, it's called the Innovia Conversation. We just want to encourage you to listen to our selection that Steve Waltz and Jeff Progolski have provided to us over the last year. They do about 2 episodes a month, and you can find out about all the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. So check out our selection and subscribe so you'll be notified when those new episodes air. All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on another Innovia webinar. Have a great day,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.